Hey there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Alicia. Today we're going to be going over all of the books that I read in January. We'll start off this video going over some stats and then I'll go ahead and talk about the individual books that I read. So let me go ahead and pull out my handy dandy journal. So in the month of January, I read a total of 17 books. That is quite a lot of books for me. In 2022, I'd say that I read an average of anywhere from 5 books to 10 books a month. So 17 is definitely a lot of books for me in a month. And I don't think it's something that I'll be able to keep up with. I think I'll definitely go ahead and decrease to about 8 to 10 books a month. So out of those 17 books, 7 of those books were 5-star reads for me, which is really good. And I also had a lot of 4-star reads. So overall, it was just a great reading month for me. Out of all of those books, only one of them came from my physical TBR, which is unfortunate. I do want to read my physical TBR, but I also have been using my library more. So, I think it's great that I'm utilizing my library a lot more. It's a give and take, and I just need to go ahead and balance that out. So out of those 17 books, 10 of those came from the library and 6 of them were advanced reader copies that I got through NetGalley. So in terms of format, 7 of those books were audiobooks, which tends to either be my primary mode of reading nowadays or at least makes up for half of the books that I'm reading. 4 of those books were ebooks and 6 of those books were physical copies. I reread 0 books this month, which is very consistent with my reading. Maybe at most I reread 5 books a year. So we'll see how it goes this year. It's something that I do want to track formally. Now in terms of page count, I read 6 books that were under 300 pages, 8 books that were between 300 and 500 pages, and 3 books that were over 500 pages, which makes me really excited because I finished 3 tomes. So out of those 17 books that I read, 10 of them were written by authors that are new to me, which means that I read 7 authors by an author that I previously read from. 2 of those works were translated works from a different language into English. 13 out of those books were written by women, which means that only 4 of the books that I read were written by men, which is consistent with my reading. I do tend to focus on books that are written by women or non-binary authors. That is something that I intentionally do, and it's something that I'm going to continue doing. 4 of the 17 books were written by Latinx authors. 4 of those 17 books were also written by Black authors, and this month, unfortunately, I read 0 books by Indigenous authors. So I do want to incorporate more books by Indigenous authors in the coming month. So the oldest book that I read is Recitatif by Toni Morrison. This was written back in 1983, and it's also the shortest book that I read. It is only 19 pages. The longest book that I read is A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, and that one is 804 pages. That is a lot of pages. In the month of January, I finished 3 series, which I'm super stoked about because I'm in the middle of a few series and I really want to get caught up. That way it's not stressful. So I did finish the Babel trilogy. Empire of Gold was actually the first book that I ended up finishing in January, and it was a great way to start the year. This is a series that is going to be a favorite of mine now. I loved the political intrigue in this book. They're characters that I didn't quite love at first. It actually took me a while to learn to love them as they matured and grew throughout the series. I also love how lush and vibrant and vivid the world building is. The Daevabad trilogy is a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy. It takes place in 18th century Cairo. This series starts off with our main character Nari. She is a con woman who accidentally summons a jinn during one of her cons. From there, this takes her on an adventure filled with magic and creatures that she only dreamt of, that she only heard about in stories. One of my favorite things about this entire trilogy, like I mentioned before, the world building is so vivid. So this is something that I've recently found out, but apparently some people, when they read, they can see what they read as if they were watching a movie. Ben is actually one of those readers, so he can actually picture what he's reading, and I can't. So whenever I read fantasy books, I don't get sucked into the world as easily. I don't get immersed. And this was the first series that I read where I felt completely immersed in the world. I forgot that time existed. I forgot that I was living in this world. And every single time that I put the books down, I just immediately wanted to go back into that world. It was fantastic. Another thing that I really struggle with in books is fighting and fight scenes because, again, I can't picture them. So a lot of times fight scenes don't really have an emotional component for me, or I don't feel the stakes because I can't picture things. But the fight scenes within this trilogy just really stood out to me because for once I actually felt the tension during the fight. And I think that's because there is a lot of dialogue within the fighting, and I think that really helps to ground me as a reader and really feel the tension unfolding as we have these fight scenes going on. If you haven't read the David trilogy, highly recommend. The next series that I ended up finishing is The Final Gambit. This is by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, and it is the third and final book in the Inheritance games. There is a new book that is coming out about the brothers in this book. It's not part of the series as far as I'm aware, and I'm not sure if I'll pick it up. We'll have to see. The Inheritance Games is a young adult contemporary mystery series that focuses on our main character, Avery Grahams. There is this billionaire that lives in Texas who passed away, and before he passed away, he wrote a will where he left all of his inheritance to this seemingly random girl. Now, there is just one condition for her to receive this inheritance, and it's that she has to live at his estate for 1 year before she could go ahead and claim it. The only problem with that is that his family lives at the estate. He has nephews and children who feel like they were slighted. He also raised his nephews to play these games with him where everything is a puzzle and everything is a game. So when Avery lands at the mansion and at the estate, they think that this is just another puzzle that they have to figure out. And from there is a love triangle that ensues, and there's a bunch of games and puzzles that they have to solve together. It's a series that is just really, really, really fun to read. It's a little bit outrageous, but I really enjoyed the characters, and I just thought it was a really, really good time. The third series that I ended up finishing is the Finlay Donovan series written by Elle Cosimano. I ended up reading Finlay Donovan Jumps the Gun earlier in the month. The Finlay Donovan series is another series that I just have a really, really, really fun time reading. It's one of those series where I could just turn off my mind and just hear about all of these outrageous things that are happening, and it'll bring a smile to my face. Finlay Donovan Jumps the Gun is definitely my least favorite book in the series, but I still gave it 4 stars. What I particularly liked about Finlay Donovan Jumps the Gun is that we got to learn a lot more about Vettel. She actually has a love interest introduced in this book, and I just still really love the dynamic between Vettel and Finlay. They're really good friends, you know, they have their fights and they don't always agree on anything, but at the end of the day they love each other and support each other, and I just loved reading about their friendship. We also get to learn a little bit more about Finlay's sister and their love interest. So if you don't know what the series is about, we have Finlay, and at the beginning of the first book, she's a struggling mom. She's a writer and she's having writer's block, and she's already used all of her advance, but she still has bills to pay. She's also going through this very messy divorce, and she just doesn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Everything seems to go wrong. So one day she meets with her editor at a Panera, and they're talking about her latest book, which is going to be a suspense crime thriller novel, and someone mistakes her for a contract killer, and they hire her to kill someone. It's definitely a series that is over the top. You have to suspend your disbelief. At some point, the Russian mob gets involved, but it was just such a good time, and I'm so glad that I read it. So those were the 3 series that I finished this month. I actually ended up starting one new series in the month of January, and that is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. I did finish A Game of Thrones earlier this month, and wow. So let's talk a little bit about my background with A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm someone who was introduced to the series via the show, and I really, really, really like the show. Minus the final season. So going into A Game of Thrones, I didn't expect to really love it as much as I ended up loving it, partly because I heard that season 1 was really faithful to the first novel. So I went into A Game of Thrones knowing a lot of the plot points and a lot of the characters, and I honestly thought that I was going to be bored for this first novel, and I was okay with that. But no, the story just sucked me right in, and I think it's because George R.R. Martin is an excellent storyteller. This is a multi-POV epic fantasy. There's a lot of political intrigue and a lot of plotting and scheming, and he does that so well. Every single point of view for me was compelling. There was not a dull point of view in my opinion. Yes, there were some points of views that irritated me a lot more than others, like Sansa's chapters or Caitlyn's chapters, but even within those POVs, I found things to latch onto, and they helped build tension and set up for other POVs that I was really interested in. So I just really liked all of the points of views, and I can see how they were all necessary for the story. I also really love a lot of these characters. Arya and Tyrion are some of my favorite characters that I've read. I do want to say that it was beneficial for me to watch the show before jumping into the series, especially as someone who can't visualize things. When I came into the book, I already had an idea of who the character was, and I can picture Arya's face because I've seen it on TV, and that really helped connect all of these characters because it's a large cast. And if I hadn't watched the show before jumping in, I feel like there would have been a lot more flipping to the back trying to figure out who people were, and I definitely think that that would have lessened my enjoyment of this book. I'm so excited to continue on with the series in February. There was a live show. There are a couple of people on BookTube here who are hosting a read along. The live show for A Game of Thrones recently happened, so I'll go ahead and link that down below in case you want to hear some non-spoiler thoughts from various different people, and then some spoiler discussions on foreshadowing and a lot of the events that happened in the book. Based on everything that I just said, George R.R. Martin is definitely my new favorite author that I read this particular month. So moving on to my favorite book that I read in January, that would have to go to All the Dangerous Things by Stacy Willingham. I ended up reading A Flicker in the Dark last year, which is also by Stacy Willingham, and it's a thriller that in my opinion was just really well done. I loved the atmosphere, so I decided to go ahead and pick up her new book, All the Dangerous Things, and I just absolutely loved it. There are a couple of trigger warnings that I do want to point out about the book, mainly suicide, child abduction, child harm, and depression. So All the Dangerous Things is a psychological thriller that deals with mental health and motherhood. Following our main character Isabel as she's trying to keep the memory of her son alive and out in the world and in the news. We learn that a year prior her son was snatched from his crib, and she has no information since then. The police have run out of leads, her husband has left her, and at this point he assumes that his son is dead, and she's really the only one who believes that her son is still alive and out there, and she wants to find him. In an act of desperation, Isabel decides to be interviewed by a true crime podcaster who claims that a previously unsolved case was solved because of this particular crime podcast. So she decides to come on, talk about her story in the hopes that someone out there has some information about her son and that she'll finally go ahead and find him. And from there, the story starts to unravel. Stacy Willingham really lays out the plot points in a very intricate way where, looking back, I can see how things are coming together. It's one of the things that frustrates me the most about thrillers, when they pull a red herring out of nowhere, or the mystery unravels because a character lied about something, or it just comes out of nowhere. I really hate that about thrillers, and that is not the case with All These Dangerous Things. We really get to see how all of the actions that these characters took lead to the end of the story. So just plot alone, I thought it's an excellent thriller. But what I really loved about this book is how compelling it was in all of its themes surrounding motherhood. We have myriad characters in here who are mothers or who want to be mothers, and they're portrayed in vastly different ways, which I think is so important because mothers aren't monoliths. And I think from the news and from the media and expectations of society, we always get these mothers who are very caring and who would go out of their way to do anything for their children and who are just really good mothers from the onset. And with this book, we really get to see an array of people and how they react to certain scenarios, and it's not perfect, and these women are not perfect, and that's what I found so beautiful. I also love how she weaved in different topics surrounding motherhood, like the expectations surrounding it and the silent suffering that can come from those expectations. It was so good that I went out and bought my own copy immediately after I read the book. and I still haven't received it in the mail. I think it's lost, which is really sad. So I need to go out and purchase a new copy. So if you're a thriller reader who really enjoys when themes are woven into the story, I think this is one that you'll really, really like. As you can tell, I look different. That's because my battery died yesterday and then I had a couple of things to do, so I didn't get back in time to film. So it is the next day for me, but not for you. So let's continue talking about the books that I've read in the month of January. Let's continue on with Recitatif by Toni Morrison. Like I mentioned before, this is the shortest book that I read. It's only 19 pages long and it is a short story. There is actually also a beautifully written introduction by Sadie Smith. I'd recommend to read the short story first if you pick it up and then read the introduction, because it really goes into what the short story is about, and Sadie Smith talks in length about her own interpretation, which I think gives away the story. And I think that the reason Recitatif is such an interesting short story is because Toni Morrison makes you confront your own hidden biases. So this is the story of two women whose lives intertwine at several points in time in their lives. And we know that one of them is white and we know that one of them is black, but she never tells us which woman is who. And it's such an interesting topic to think about because white women think that a certain character is white and black women think that a certain character is black. So again, super, super, super interesting and a great exploration of like race and class and hidden biases. And it's so short, so highly recommend. So going in no particular order now, another book that I finished in the month of January is The Spite House. This is by Johnny Compton and this will be published February 7th of 2023. By the time this video is up, I think it might have already been published. But this is a gothic horror book by a debut author and it was really, really, really good. I really enjoyed this book. It has a very slow burn gothic feel to it, and it also incorporates elements of a haunted house and of the paranormal. And so in this story, we're following our main character, Eric Ross, and his two daughters, Des and Stacy. We know right off the bat that they are on the run from something, but we don't really know why. We don't know a lot about their past. We just know that they're really living paycheck to paycheck and going from motel to motel, trying to evade someone or something. So when the opportunity comes up to stay at a haunted house and document the paranormal activity inside of the house for a very large sum of money, it's a no-brainer to Eric. They're going to have a house that they can stay in for a couple of weeks, and at the end he'll have a large payout, enough to give a new life to his daughters. But as Eric becomes the caretaker of this house, he starts to learn things that the owner of the house, Eunice, never let on. And Eric and Eunice are both hiding secrets that can put them all in danger. What I really loved about this book is that gothic feel of the story. We have Eric, Des, and Stacy who are in a new place and it's a derelict house and it's a little bit creepy. As the story goes on, we actually get to learn a little bit more about the history of the Spite House, which I learned that is a house that's built to spite someone, to make someone angry, which is a super interesting concept. I didn't realize that spite houses existed. So we get to learn a little bit more about the house, the history, and its owner, and I just thought that was really fascinating. By the way, the audiobook is also narrated by Adam Lazar-White, who can read his grocery list out to me and I will listen to it. I just love the way he narrates things. So I definitely recommend to pick up the audiobook because he is a fantastic narrator. The next book that I ended up finishing in the month of January is The Last Astronaut by David Wellington. And this was really, 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 really good. I just had such a great reading month in January. A lot of these books were just really good. And this particular book was one that is in the category of I just had an awesome time reading it. It was creepy, it was claustrophobic. I would say that one of my fears is being in a space and not knowing how big it is and also having low visibility. So you feel like you're very small in a very large space and you don't know what else is in that space. And this book does this so well. So what is The Last Astronaut about? This is a first contact with alien story that takes place out in space. We have this unidentified object that is making its way towards Earth. and it seems to be decelerating and changing direction at its own will. Because of this, NASA thinks that it is an alien spaceship, and so they get a crew together in order to go and communicate with it and figure out why it's making its way towards Earth. The leader of this crew is one of our main characters named Sally Jansen. She is a former astronaut who previously lost one of her comrades during an earlier space mission, and ever since then, she's been looking for a way to redeem herself, and she thinks that this could be her opportunity. Unbeknownst to her and the rest of her team, there is another crew that already set out to meet this alien spacecraft. This belongs to a private firm, and they got there first. So when Sally and her teammates get there, they find out that this crew not only got there first, but they're already inside of the spaceship. And according to their mission plans and log, they should have already been back, but they're nowhere to be found. There is one particular character that just annoyed the heck out of me, and hearing him talk and being in his head was the most annoying thing in the world. But I was able to get through his part because, again, I just wanted to figure out what comes next. And I think one of the greatest things about this particular book is that it makes us question our assumptions of things that are unknown to us, which I thought was really fantastic. And that's really all I can say because I don't want to give spoilers. But if you're someone that likes first contact with alien stories or books that blend sci-fi and horror, I thought it was really well done in this particular book. So the next book that I ended up finishing in the month of January is How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water by Angie Cruz. This is the author of Dominicana, which I actually haven't read, but it's going to become a priority of mine after reading this book. It's quite a short little book. It's under 200 pages, and it's told in a very interesting way. We follow Cara Romero, who is a Dominican immigrant living in New York City. She has recently lost her job as a factory worker where she worked for more than a decade, and she's going to career counseling to find a new prospective job. And that is actually how the story is primarily told. Cara begins to divulge her life story to the social worker that is assigned to her. We get to learn a little bit more about her life, and the people that she interacts with. It's a book that slowly grew on me, and it made me laugh, it made me cry. Some parts of it made me angry, other parts of it made me think more about my mom and my grandmother and my aunts, who I know very well, but I know that I don't know everything about their lives. It makes me think especially of my mom and everything that she's lived through and gone through before even I was born, and everything that I don't know about her. Cara is definitely a character that is going to stick with me for a very long time. She is someone who genuinely cares about those around her. She's a giver, she's a helper, but she's also deeply flawed and very entrenched in the ways that she thinks and in the ways that she was brought up. I think this book speaks a lot to different generations and how younger generations often have a hard time meeting older generations halfway. I think this book explores that in a very subtle way and in a very fast way. It's only 200 pages. If you're looking for an emotional story with a lot of heart, this is one that I definitely recommend to pick up. The next book that I ended up finishing in the month of January was an advanced reader copy. This is What Happened to Ruthy Ramirez by Claire Jimenez, and this will be published on March 7th, 2023 by Grand Central Publishing. This is another book that is quite short and sweet. It's 240 pages, and in this book we primarily follow the lives of three separate women, Nina and Jessica, who are sisters, and Dolores, who is their mom. We find out that years prior, Ruthy, who is their sister and daughter, went missing one day after track practice. She never came home after track practice one day, and the police didn't really go out of their way to look for her. They assumed that she just ran away and that she would come back. Fast forward several years into the future, Jessica and Nina are watching this reality TV show called Catfight. And while they're watching this, they notice that one of the contestants looks fairly similar to their sister Ruthy, except in this TV show she goes by Ruby. And the more that they watch this show, Jessica and Nina become convinced that this is their sister, and they have to go find her and confront her and ask her why she left all those years ago. Eventually, their mom finds out that this is what they've been working on, and she also gets involved. And through all of these pages, as it's leading up to this confrontation, we get to hear more about what their life was growing up. We get to learn more intimate details about each of them, and also learn more about how Ruthy's disappearance affected them in their own individual ways. This is a book that I think will speak to a lot of millennials. It's filled with tons of references of the early 2000s. It also sort of speaks to that particular time era where people were going to college and graduating, and then they would come out and there was nothing in the job market for them. There's also a lot of cussing in the book and a lot of sister drama. I would say that What Happened to Ruthy Ramirez leans more on the contemporary side rather than on the mystery side, because it does deal a lot more with learning more about these women. We also do have chapters from Ruthy's perspectives, and through these chapters we get to learn more about Ruthy and about who she was before she disappeared. The next book that I finished in the month of January is My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. And this is another very short book. It was 226 pages long, and I did listen to this book via audiobook. In My Sister the Serial Killer, we follow two sisters, Ayula and Korede. Korede works as a nurse in a hospital, and she's trying to get her life together. She also has this really big crush on one of her co-workers, but she doesn't really know how to express that and how to make a move. And she has a sister who is a serial killer. Ayula is someone who has been disappointed by men one too many times, and as someone who's really beautiful and attracts the attention of men very easily, she goes on dates, and once they cross a certain line, she kills them. But she doesn't really know how to clean up her own messes. She's the youngest in the family, and she is used to getting her way at home. So Ayula naturally calls up her big sister to help clean up her mess. Korede feels like she is responsible for her sister and genuinely wants to help her clean up her messes, but in a way she's also guilt-ridden. Is she doing the right thing by helping out her sister? And at some point she questions whether she should just let her sister clean up her own mess. There was also a lot of commentary on men and on social media and the lengths that we're willing to go to protect someone that we love. This is classified as a thriller. I wouldn't say that it is a thriller. Again, it leads more on that contemporary side. So if you're looking for a really entertaining, fun, contemporary book with tons of drama and one that explores sibling dynamics, I think this is a great one to pick up. The next book that I ended up finishing in the month of January is Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. This is a book that particularly reminded me a lot of Luster by Raven Leilani, but I would say that Queenie has a lot more humor embedded into the story. So in Queenie, we follow a 25-year-old Jamaican British woman named Queenie. Queenie is at a point in her life where she is trying to navigate the complexities of being a Black woman in modern times, navigating two separate cultures. Queenie is also currently going through a very difficult situation. She had a long-term boyfriend who is white, and she experienced a lot of microaggressions from his family while they were dating. She also recently had an abortion that her long-term boyfriend doesn't know about, and he decided that he needs a break, and really he's breaking up with her, but she can't really see it. So she decides that she's going to wait for him, and throughout this entire time she's making mistake after mistake. She can't seem to get her life together. She's going on dates with a lot of different men who don't treat her well. So by all accounts, Queenie is a little bit of a train wreck. She does have a very supportive group of friends that she can talk to and complain to, and their conversations are just hilarious. This is definitely one of those books where the humor is either going to land or it's not. That's something that's really subjective. It really works for me, and I appreciated the levity while we discuss all of these other more serious topics like abortion, like microaggressions, or dating men that are just not good to you, but you can't really see that because you're wrapped up in so much of your own pain. There's also discussions on mental health. She is initially very adamant about not going to a mental health specialist because her family wouldn't approve, and that's another layer that she needs to learn how to navigate. So although I really enjoyed the humor in this book, it's also a book that navigates a lot of delicate and very dark topics, so please do look up trigger warnings if you decide to pick it up. The next book that I ended up finishing in the month of January is We Spread by Iain Reid. This is the author of Foe, which I haven't read, and I'm thinking of ending things, which I completely loved back in 2021. So We Spread is his newest book, and it was different from what I expected it to be. It's a very quiet book, but it's also one that just punches you in the gut with a lot of realities and a lot of fears that you didn't think that you could have. So in this, we are following our main character, Penny. Penny lived with the love of her life and he passed away, and now she's living by herself in an apartment. She's really old. Her body and her mind are not what they used to be. She is navigating the world by herself, and she's doing it in a world that doesn't seem to care for people her age. Penny also thinks about all of the things that she used to do, all of the hobbies she used to have. She also thinks she's being watched. One day when she looks out the window, she sees this strange person looking through her window, and she thinks that she heard noises next door, but that room has been vacated for the past few months. So one day as she's, going about her life, she ends up falling and hitting her head. And because of the fall, she ends up being put in an assisted living facility that was arranged for her before her long-term partner passed away. Now, at first, she loves this living assisted facility. She enjoys eating again. She's around people her own age who seem to really be enjoying themselves and loving life. And so this encourages her to, form friendships and to start painting again and to just really start enjoying and valuing life. But the more that she's there, the more that she starts to question the intentions of the people there, and she starts to lose track of time. And so it's really an exploration of, is something dark and macabre really going on, or is it just her own mind and her own body failing her? It was definitely a very interesting and creepy read at times. At other times, it's a very melancholy and reflective read. And I just really enjoyed a lot of the commentary on aging and what happens to us when we start to lose our mind and control of our body. Really enjoyed this one, and I just need to pick up Iain Reid's backlist because he's an author that I just really enjoy all of the time. The next book that I ended up finishing in the month of January is called The Bitch by Pilar Quintana. This is translated by Lisa Dillman. It's a short, dark, and at times violent story of a woman who decides to adopt a dog. Damaris, our main character, is getting older and older, and her family has expectations of her to get pregnant, to have kids. So does her entire community. This is set in a very small island town where everybody knows each other's business and people are constantly talking to each other and gossiping about each other. And she just feels like a failure as a woman and as a failure in her marriage for not being able to have kids. So when she finds a puppy that she adopts, it brings immediate joy into her life because finally she's able to nurture something, and it was something that was expected of her. So it's something that she thought she really wanted. As any person out there who has had a dog, you know that puppies are a handful, and as they grow up, they start to not listen to you and they become really independent and they want to do their own things. And that is exactly what happens to the puppy that Damaris gets. The puppy starts to run away, and actually it runs away and gets pregnant with its own dogs. It seems that it doesn't always want to spend time with Damaris and only comes back for food. And Damaris is really angry that this dog that she nurtured and that she cared for doesn't want to listen to her, and she feels like this dog is ungrateful. Very short, but it is filled with depictions of tenderness but also brutality. But if you are averse to animal cruelty, I would suggest to not pick this up. It's not gratuitous violence, so if you don't mind that, I think it's a great exploration of expectations that women have in motherhood and what that looks like. The next book that I finished in the month of January is called Witches by Brenda Lozano, and this is translated by Heather Cleary. This is actually the second book that I've read by this author. I ended up reading Loop, also by Brenda Lozano, last year, and it was a book that really intrigued me. Her writing style and the way that she tackles things is really interesting to me. She's a little bit of an experimental writer. Her stories are non-linear and they almost feel hallucinogenic as you're reading. It feels like a fever dream, and that is definitely the case with certain parts of Witches. So in Witches, she juxtaposes the lives of two separate and very different women, Zoe and Feliciana. Feliciana's character is actually inspired by the life of Maria Magdalena Garcia, who was a curandera or healer who lived in Oaxaca, and she was really famous. A lot of like famous people went down to Oaxaca to talk to her and learn about her practices. Zoe, on the other hand, is living a very modern experience that a lot of us live. She is a journalist in Mexico City, and she's really being weighed down by all of these social expectations around her. The narrative unfolds as Feliciana starts to recount her life story to Zoe. We have alternating chapters where we learn about each of their struggles, about each of their lives. This is a book that is difficult to recommend to people because it's very niche. It can be repetitive at times, but it's also a book that feels I feel like I learned a lot from this book, but the plot was also really engaging. So I would say that if you don't mind experimental writing, if you like to learn about different cultures, and if the nature of witches or healers interests you in any way, this is one that I would pick up and try. We're almost done. There's 2 more books left. So the next book that I ended up finishing in the month of January is called The Hunter by Jennifer Herrera. And this is a procedural thriller with a diverse cast of characters, which I was really happy to see because a lot of the procedurals that I've read in the past are not very diverse. So it was nice to see diversity within this book. It's a book that's really atmospheric, and it toes the line of, is it supernatural or is it not? And so here we're following our main character, Lay. She was a detective for the NYPD until recently she's been laid off. There was this incident that happened in the past where she pointed her gun at her then partner, but we don't really know why this happened. So she is suspended by her boss, who also happens to be her husband. For some reason, this creates a divide between her and her husband. So when her younger brother asks her to come home to their small rural town in Ohio to investigate some suspicious suicides, Lay decides to go back home and investigate to see if they were murders. She hopes to be able to solve this crime, and hopefully this will shed some good light on her career and she'll be taken back in by NYPD. While she's in Ohio investigating whether these suicides were actual suicides or whether it's something more nefarious going on here, she starts to dig up a lot of the history of this town. There's some weird things going on with this cave that is local to the town, and there's a lot of, is it paranormal or is it not? I would say that for the most part, I enjoyed several parts of the book. This is her debut novel, and it very much shows. The writing is a little bit clunky. The characters themselves feel like archetypes of your standard procedural novels, and there's just not a lot of depth to the characters. Like, I wasn't really invested in the separation between Lay and her husband because we don't know what caused the strife to begin with. And I know that we're supposed to wonder what happened, and later we get to learn more about them, but I wasn't interested enough right at the beginning because we didn't really have context. And I pretty much felt like that with a lot of the characters for the majority of the novel. I did, however, want to figure out what happened to those men, and I really enjoyed the parts of the history of the town and how that connected to the ending of the book. Overall, I would say that this is a good debut. I love that there were diverse characters in here, and I will continue to read her novels. And I will continue to read her novels to see how she grows as an author. The last and final book that I finished in the month of January is Babel by R.F. Kuang. I have the physical copy now, but I read it as an e-arc through NetGalley. Babel was a book that I was initially very conflicted about, but it's one that I slowly fell in love with. I do have to give the caveat that I read Babel over the span of 3 months. It's not a book that I just sat down and binged because it has so much to unpack. It's a very dense book. It's a very academic book. It's filled with tons of footnotes and definitions and etymology of words. It's quite the feat. If you haven't heard of Babel yet, this is R.F. Kuang's latest book, and it is an alternate history fantasy book and reaction to the dark academia genre. The magic system is really simple, and it's used as a catalyst to explore deeper themes like colonialism. So if you go into this thinking that it's going to be a magical and fantastical book, that's definitely not what it is. We have these bars that are imbued with different translations, and based on the translations, they're able to do different things. It's a magic system that is still being developed and tested. And so in Babel, we're following our main character, Robin. Robin grew up in Canton, and when he was younger, his family died. So he was taken in by this white man who lives in London. So he was robbed of his identity and taken to London to grow up under this man, studying a different dialect than what he grew up with. He grew up speaking Cantonese, and now he is being forced to learn Mandarin and have Mandarin as his native tongue. He's also learning other languages like Latin and Greek, and all of these efforts are so that Robin can attend Oxford. Here he will attend the Royal Institute of Translation, also called Babel, where he will use his knowledge and fluency of Mandarin in order to be able to use pairings for translation to imbue these silver works with their magic. What Robin doesn't know is that there is a small group of rebel students who parted from Babel and who want to basically burn down this institution. We see Robin as he becomes conflicted with his education. He's equal parts thankful for being able to have all of the luxuries that he now has, to be able to have food, to be able to study, but he doesn't really quite fit in, and he really starts to see and learn of the ramifications of the life that he is living and how he's being complicit to the British Empire and their colonization of other countries, and in particular his home. It's a book that is extremely well researched and has so much to say. It can be a little bit heavy-handed with its messaging, which I had no problem with. I feel like when we talk about rebellions and colonialism and complicity of white supremacy, you have to be heavy-handed with it in some regard because you're going against the status quo. I would say that one of the things I wish R.F. Kuang would have done to elevate the story is possibly give us more perspectives from different characters. Some of the friends that Robin makes at his university are so interesting, and I wish I would have seen things from their perspective. So yes, I slowly fell in love with it, and now I really want to go back and read the Poppy War series because I still haven't read that, and she's coming out with a new book soon. Those were all of the books that I read in the month of January. After this, I will be filming my best books of 2022, so you can go ahead and expect that video sometime before February ends. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Comment down below what your favorite book of January was.